Hey, good morning, good afternoon, perhaps good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jason Larson, and I'm the Director of Content here at the International Institute for Analytics, and I'm your host for today's session. Welcome to today's webinar, our 2023 predictions and priorities. This session is always a fan favorite. I'm excited to dive in. In case you are new to the International Institute for Analytics, or IIA as we like to call it, we are a research and advisory firm co-founded by Tom Davenport and CEO Jack Phillips. Through analytics assessments, research, expert advice, and platforms for peer-to-peer exchange, IIA supports companies in growing their data and analytics capabilities and successfully making that transition to data-driven decision-making, advanced analytics, and AI. Our clients rely on us to provide unbiased insights and a range of perspectives from our network of independent analytics experts and practitioners. And today's discussion is a part of that effort, an ongoing series of webinars designed to highlight important concepts, trends, and strategies relevant to DNA leaders and their teams. So for more information on our three service lines, please visit our website. We'll drop a link to that homepage in the chat. Okay, before we kick off this amazing session, let's go over a few housekeeping items. All right, we encourage you to submit questions or comments via the chat window, and we'll make sure to save time at the end of the session to address as many questions as possible. A recorded version of this webinar will be available and emailed out after the presentation, and a full transcript will be available in our client-only library in the next few days. So without further ado, we are delighted to welcome our panel of predictors today. Many of you on the call are familiar with Tom, Bill, and Brian. Tom is co-founder, as I said, and advisor of IIA. He teaches at several distinguished colleges and universities. 2022 has been a busy year for Tom, tapping away at the keyboard. He recently co-authored 3 new books, Working with AI, All In on AI, and Advanced Introduction to AI in Healthcare. Bill is IIA's CAO. He also directs the Center for Statistics and Analytical Research at Kennesaw State University. His most recent book is Winning the Room. And last but not least, Brian, who is going to help moderate this session. He leads our Analytics Leadership Consortium and the Research and Advisory Network here at IIA. Okay, so welcome, gentlemen. The pressure is on. Brian, I'll let you take it from here.
All right. Thanks, Jason. I'd just like to welcome everybody. We're excited to be here, and I'd like to thank Tom and Bill for joining me here on this this adventure. I think on average, we've each written a couple of great books, right? It's a little stats humor for you there. But I also like to thank the IIA team, right? Jasmine and Ryan and Jason for helping us get to this point as well. There's a lot of work that goes behind the scenes to get us here. So it's hard to believe, but I think this is the 13th year that IIA has made a set of predictions for the coming year, which is, it's kind of hard to believe, right? It's kind of hard to imagine all that's changed in the data and analytics space over that time. So our goal today here is really to identify some trends that we think are really going to become important in the next year or so. These are things that, are not 5-10 years out, but they're right on the doorstep. And then about 6 years ago or so, IIA started adding a set of priorities to match those predictions. So we'll cover that as well, right? And again, these are meant to be very practical guidance on what you might consider doing in your organization over the coming year. So the team in front of you here, we've pulled together 5 predictions and corresponding priorities for the next year. And then we also have a bonus 6th guest prediction that we'll share as well here. So let's go ahead and start. And, just to ground us here, we'll take a look at what we said last year at this time. And Bill, you made a great prediction last year. You said at the end of the webinar that this slide would kick us off for 2023, and you were right? Here we are. So this is what we said last year. So like good data people, right? I think it's good to acknowledge when we might have gotten something wrong, right? When the data tells us something differently. So we'll spend a few minutes here and just kind of maybe talk about what we got right and what we might have missed on. So excuse me. I know one, right? If I look there at number 4, AI and analytics product management, I think you all hit that nail on the head there. Yeah, we've seen among a lot of our clients and a lot of people we work with, right, that this last year was really a time where people leaned into AI and analytics product management, right? We've seen new teams form there. We've seen a lot of training happen. And it seems like that has, even though it's been talked about for a few years, last year felt like it really took off and gained a lot of momentum. I even noticed recently on both Coursera and Udacity, they have specializations or courses on being an AI product manager, which I thought was really interesting there. And I know Bill and Tom, both of you have continued to write about this space. Anything you want to add here?
The only thing I would say, Brian, is that I've seen 2 surveys, one of which I did with Amazon Web Services of chief data officers, and then another one with New Vantage Partners, which I always, help to analyze a little bit and write about. And both of them, the AWS one said 39% of chief data officers were pursuing data product management, which I thought was pretty high. But then the New Vantage Partners one, which just was done in the last week or so, said something like 60-something%. So the data suggests that we were right on that one.
Yeah, I'd just say, when you look backward in time, it becomes pretty obvious that this was going to end up happening, because as you start to package and then automate and embed analytics across an enterprise, at some point those things become part of the day-to-day flow, and they're going to need to be managed. And so just like other aspects of a business, I think it's easy to look back and see how this came to be, though I think 5 or 6 years ago, I don't know that it was as obvious as things were evolving that it would lead here. But I think it's a really good trend, because it's another angle that has organizations taking analytical efforts more seriously and more formally, which I think is good for all of us.
Yeah, 5 or 6 years ago, we thought data scientists could do it all. Somehow we thought it was the sexiest job of the 21st century. And now we realize there are no data science unicorns out there.
Right. That's right. All right. Thanks. Bill, I think what's another one of these we got right last year?
I'll mention the top one, the low code and no code. That trend, I think, absolutely did continue this past year. It seems to me that a lot of the product releases I saw from companies were adding more to their low code or no code options, as well as new tool sets coming out. I think an interesting twist here will be something we're going to talk about a little bit later with generative AI, yet another way to generate code, not only with low code, but just with potentially your voice, which is interesting. So I think this is something that we definitely saw continue, and I don't anticipate it's gonna slow down either.
Hey, you're stealing my thunder, Bill Franks. So that prediction is mine.
All right. Well, and Tom, just to balance things out, are there any misses we had last year?
Well, I wish that it hadn't been a miss. And I don't think we have a whole lot of data on it, but this number 6 about a focus on decisions returns as crisis modes end. I think we were wrong twice there. A focus on decisions hasn't returned that much. There's a little bit of it. I think there's a Gartner term now, decision intelligence, but not. I would love to see more companies embracing a focus on decisions and how to make them effectively using analytics, AI, and other tools, but I don't think that's really come about. I think it was more wishful thinking. And I think crisis modes haven't really ended in 2022. So, COVID is declining, but, we have RSV and the flu and the Ukraine-Russia war and so on. So I think we've got, and inflation, so we've still got plenty of crises to worry about. And so maybe that's what kept us from focusing on decisions as much as we might. But, we wondered if 7 predictions was too many, and I guess it was. So we were more likely to have a bad one in there.
Okay. Well, good. All right. We cut it down to 5 this year, so our odds are better.
Yeah.
Odds are in our favor. All right. Well, thank you. Well, let's go ahead and we'll kick off this year. So I'll start with our first prediction, and that's around data governance. And we think it might take a few new directions this year. So data governance is hard, right? I know that's breaking news, right? You heard it here first, right? But it is a challenge, and it's been that way for a long time. And I think we know a number of organizations that have gone through kind of multiple data governance initiatives. And obviously it's highly important, right? I don't think anybody would argue against that, right? We all want the benefits of great data governance, right? We want to have that high quality data. We want to know where to find data, or where our business partners can find the data they need. We want data to be used consistently across the organization, right? So if we're looking at 2 metrics, right, they tell us, they tell us the same thing. And we still need to meet our compliance objectives as well. But I'm not sure if some of the ways we've been doing it have been the best. So Tom, you actually wrote something recently that I found really insightful, right? Where you're talking to chief data and chief data analytics officers, and found that data governance still, one of their primary responsibilities. They're still spending a lot of time there. But many of them are realizing that they can't just do that, right? They can't just do data, right? They also have to add in the analytics and AI initiatives, because without that, unfortunately, the chief data officer role tends to have a short tenure, right? If you can't add value through the analytics and AI there.
Yeah, and I think nobody likes to be told what to do, and data governance has always had a you must do this kind of angle. And some of the chief data and analytics officers I interviewed for that project said they were trying to move away from it toward a more, even using a different term, enablement or something like that, to make it easy to do the right thing through platforms and tools, not just telling people what they need to do.
Yeah. Well, that leads us into our priority, which is, I think it might be time to try some alternative approaches, right? So I think some of that, what we've seen over the last few years, the one size fits all, the top down might not be the best approach, right? We may need to be willing to meet users a little bit more where they are. I just noticed, I think it was just a week or two ago, Elation, right? It's known for their data catalog. Just had an announcement where they offered a product that allows users to pull in governed data into a spreadsheet, right? Or into a Google Sheet, right? Which I think is an acknowledgement that, as much as we try, spreadsheets are a huge part of organizations, and but they can be riddled with bad data, and this is acknowledgement of, hey, we got to meet the users where they're at, and we're not going to get rid of spreadsheets. So how can we at least ensure that they're bringing in good data into those, right? I think we're also going to see a lot of organizations this year lean into more of the data observability and data quality types of initiatives. There's a lot of tools coming out there as well, and I think we're going to see more and more companies start to embrace those over this year.
Yeah, also, back to Tom's point about the people don't like to be told what to do. I forget, sometime early in the year, one of my blogs talked about having governance position more as a referee than as a police force, meaning that people are resistant to the idea of being watched, enforced, otherwise, told what to do. And in fact, in your day-to-day life, if you're coming in contact with a police officer, typically either you've done something wrong or something bad's happened to someone that and they're coming to tell you about it, versus, the World Cup semifinals start in a few hours. You got referees out there, and their main goal is to keep the game in line while staying out of the way as much as possible. And I think the better that you can get your governance programs such that people feel like they're just being nudged with it by a ref, hey, a little bit of a whistle, please don't do any more of that, but proceed, as opposed to a default of, we're monitoring, looking for a chance to arrest you. I think it can actually make quite a big difference psychologically on folks.
It's a very timely reference to the World Cup there, Bill. But nobody needs to sign off. They're not on yet. So
yeah. Well, and Bill, there might be some English fans that would argue that the refs haven't quite stayed out of the way like they should have.
Well, you can never please everybody.
Right. Right. All right. Tom, we'll hand it over to you here for our second prediction.
Okay, so this is kind of related to the one that Brian just described, and it's I've been hearing more and more about this idea of companies creating a set of reusable data sets that are easily applied. We all know that data scientists spend much of their time mucking around with data, to use the technical term for that. And companies are trying to, I think, increase the productivity of analytics and data science. It's also related to the sort of citizen data science movement, which we described in previous years, where they want to make it easier for non-professionals to do great analytics and AI work. And so the only way you can really do that is to make a set of data assets available for people to use, which are already high quality and clearly labeled with the right metadata and so on, so that they can be easily modeled. And I think as companies think more about building analytics and AI infrastructure, they're going to be moving more into the use of these reusable data sets, creating marketplaces or data hubs, if you will, in order to make them available. And I think this is part of sort of a long-term secular trend by technology people to focus on the consumption aspects of the data supply chain rather than just the capture and storage and so on, which they really focused on for many years. So in some ways, this is not a new idea. I was talking to somebody about this, and he said, isn't that what object-oriented systems were supposed to be about? That you'd have reusable data, reusable objects, programming objects, et cetera. And I said, yeah, well, everything that goes around comes around. But I think we will see more of that in the next few years. And of course, if you're going to do it, you need to do some assessment of what kind of data is really demanded or needed across the organization, so you can start to create those assets in a reasonable, prioritized way. Just not creating the ones that are easiest to create the ones that are going to be most valuable to the organization. And that in itself, I think, sends a signal of what the analytics and AI priorities ought to be within the organization. Somebody was telling me at AT&T, for example, they have all these reusable churn data sets around, and they want to prevent churn. Any mobile phone company is going to want to do that, so they make it as easy as possible with different customer churn data sets that you can easily apply. So I don't know if anybody has any comments on that, but I do think it's also, as I was suggesting, a form of more effective data governance.
Yeah, I'd say that ties in a little bit with last year's around the product management, but I think it does come at it from that different angle, right? These are some fundamental, I guess some fundamental, you could say, data products in some cases, or data sets if it's purely internal. But I think the standardization is key, because, and it's tied to the last thing you want. Everyone always talks about you have different parts of the company using different definitions of margin or some other metric. Well, you similarly don't want different parts of the company building churn models using different data sets that aren't compatible, that either have different metrics or differently defined metrics. So I think this, this makes a lot of sense. The standardization is really, helping scale the efforts more accurately and more consistently.
Yeah, I think maybe we talked about this some in discussing this issue, but some people would define data products as reusable data sets. Since we're representing the International Institute for Analytics here, we generally believe that, a data product should have not only data in it, but something to make sense of the data. That's what it takes to make a completely useful product. But there certainly are some, I don't think there's any right definition, but there are some people who define a data product as just a kind of, well crafted, well labeled, reusable data set. Okay, we done with this one, Brian?
Right.
We have
I
to
think so.
log it anymore?
Yeah. You ready to move on
Okay.
to the next one?
Yeah, so the next one I think is about as predictable as it could be. It's sort of like predicting that if Meryl Streep has a movie out, she's going to get an Academy Award nomination. So generative AI, which goes under various names, some people call it transformers, some I think at Stanford they've been pushing this idea of foundational models. I think generative AI is sort of taking over as the category name, but these are technologies, AI technologies based on machine learning, typically, deep learning neural networks that predict the next thing in a sequence of content based on past content on which they've been trained. So, predict the next word, the next paragraph, the next page or so of text, or the next image based on an image database associated with certain labels associated with each image. So you give it a prompt and it produces a text string or an image, or increasingly, I think, a video. These systems are amazingly versatile. They can produce programming code, they can produce poetry, they can, you can say, I want my answer in iambic pentameter, and it will give you that. We're petrified in universities that the essay is going to go the way of the dinosaur, because these things are really pretty good at producing essays, and they, unlike some of my students, they don't have grammatical errors, and they don't wrestle with writing in English if they're from a different country. So these things are getting extremely popular, and I think we can only now anticipate both the opportunities that will arise from them. It's almost like we discover a new one every day in the press, and also the risk, the issue of misinformation. These systems, I thought there was a great illustration of this with ChatGPT, which is the thing that's gotten people excited most recently, where it gave a quite learned discourse on the Ohio-Indiana War, which of course never existed, but that didn't stop it. It sounded, very plausible. And also the deep fake idea, where you can, produce images and photos and videos of things that don't actually exist. I think that's going to cause a lot of problems. And there's lots of intellectual property issues here too. So we think that you should explore this potential as an organization. They're probably most frequently used in marketing right now, but some code generation is being explored. I wrote an article about this in Harvard Business Review a couple of weeks ago about what are some of the business-oriented applications. People are starting to use it for knowledge management as well, which, as a former knowledge management person, I think is quite interesting that it could sort of take all of your textual content or whatever and allow people to access it quite easily just by putting in a prompt or so. so there are some business applications, but I think you should also be aware that there are these challenges. And if you do pursue it aggressively, you may want to start talking with your general counsel's office about some of the intellectual property issues, because the code generation one has already been challenged in a lawsuit. And I suspect we'll see a lot more of those. So anyway, really exciting trend, sort of single-handedly has resuscitated AI during the kind of tough times that we're starting to see in the venture economy for AI startups, but lots of issues to think about.
Tom, I just want to say, if Ohio's going to have a war with one of its borders, it's going to be that state up north. Right? It's not going to be Indiana.
That's because of football, I would imagine. Huh?
That's right. That's right.
I'll tell you what I found. I saw someone
who won
forwarded
that
me a-
game this year, Brian.
Oh, who's in the playoffs? Huh? We still made it. All right.
Say someone forwarded me a thread in the last couple of days that was really intriguing, where someone went and asked one of the generative AI algorithms to write a academic style paper complete with references, and what came out, to Tom's point, sounded fairly real, and it even had links to articles with authors and good sounding names. Well, here's something that I hadn't thought about explicitly, which is the generative AI was generating those links and such as well. In other words, the links were not actually real. Some of these were not real papers. They were real sounding papers in some cases with real authors, but who were in different disciplines. And so it wasn't just imagining the paragraphs, it was imagining the references themselves, which I found a fascinating, how to twist your brain. And then to bring it back, how it's going mainstream, as I have a high school son who had an engineering assignment this week, and their teacher told him to get some code that did some obscure, I didn't even know what it was he's supposed to be doing, very obscure. And the teacher even said, don't code this, go find code that does it. It's out there. Just find it. So he used one of the chat bots to create code. He goes, yeah, so it actually generated me the code that'll do this. And so based on that other thing, I asked him, I said, did you test that the code actually does it, that it actually works, or it just generated you code that you're assuming works? And he acknowledged he had not yet tested said code. So that was my guidance to him. Great to use generative AI, but you better validate what comes out of it if you're relying on pieces of it as fact.
Yeah, I think that's the basic message. Humans still need to be involved both at the front end in issuing prompts. And when I was doing research for this article I wrote, some people told me they think prompt engineering is going to be a well-established role. There already, there's a prompt marketplace you can go to, and a book of image prompts and so on. And then on the back end, as Bill suggests, validating it, editing it, if it's text or whatever. The guy who won the Colorado State Fair Art Prize with an image created with Midjourney, one of these image systems, said he spent 80 hours on trying out different prompts and then sort of editing, if you will, artistically the image once it came out. So you can't forget that part at all.
Yeah, I know. I experienced some of that pain when DALL-E 2 came out. I thought, oh, I'll create an image for this meeting. It'll come up. It'll be just something fun to kick off. And I quickly realized everything I was getting was garbage because I didn't know how to write the prompt. And then I went out there and looked at some examples, and it got better. But it's a skill. It's a talent. Let's move on here. Bill, you want to take us through prediction 4?
Yeah. So this is one, it's been around a couple of years, but this year, our discussion was around that synthetic data is going to reach critical mass. And, when I first heard that term several years ago, I actually thought it was a little off-putting. I'm like, what do you mean synthetic data? That's fake, right? What are you talking about? But then probably 2 years ago, I was first involved in a project that utilized it. And so there's a couple kinds of synthetic data. In traditional data scenarios, and the project I was on was involving some retail transaction data. there may not be permission to share some of the actual transaction data, and or the data may have a bit of noise and such. And there's software out there now. I know somebody who had started a company in this area, even where I can feed it a real data set, a sample of real data, whether it be transaction data, it could be medical records, and it will generate fake data that mimics that real data across the key dimensions that I specify from a statistical perspective. So in the case of that project we were working on, we wanted to do some promotion modeling. We could generate fake records for transactions that would have realistic statistical properties around lift of sales and such. So that actually had helped you could test your models. Did they actually grab the effect? Because we knew exactly what the effect was. Now, on the other hand, there's things that have been happening for a couple of years that I think fall in this camp, like training autonomous vehicle algorithms using Grand Theft Auto or other video games. So that's fake data, meaning, and synthetic. It's not a real road. It's not actual footage, yet it mimics it closely enough that especially early stage autonomous vehicles code can learn about how do you stay between the lines, and what's a stop sign. And so the key here, I think, is that this synthetic data, the implication is that it can actually help you make better models that work better in the real world with real world data, even though the synthetic data is somewhat fake. And I think that's a little bit mind blowing. So I think the priorities here, it's really simple. If you're doing a lot of work with sensitive data, like medical records, for example, synthetic data could be your friend in a huge way, because you could generate data sets for third parties, whether they be students or researchers or other partner companies, that they can build analytics off of without actually sharing the sensitive medical information. It's simply a synthetic version. But even more important, I think, in some of the areas of AI, one of the known issues with facial recognition algorithms is they can be biased, and they don't work well if lighting's not good and so forth. Well, to get 10,000 pictures of me where I have, 10 angles to my face, 10 levels of light, 10 different hairstyles, and maybe even 10 different skin tones would be very, very costly and ineffective, especially at scale. Well, you can use, back to Tom's prediction, generative AI can generate fake images of me that are realistic enough to represent my face from a different angle, with a different hairstyle, with a different skin tone. And they're good enough that an actual facial recognition algorithm could become better at recognizing real faces. So it could be a terrific tool for helping address bias and so forth in models of any type, by synthetically generating data from the groups that are getting either underrepresented or under accurate in terms of the prediction. So overall, I think synthetic data, it's starting to hit its stride. And I think it, combined with generative AI, I think they're going to feed off each other.
That's a really interesting idea, Bill. I think you should maybe write a blog post about that too for IIA.
I'll
is
snap
that
my fingers and say,
today,
it came out this morning, Tom.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm
Good
sure you
timing.
didn't know that at the time when you said that, though.
Yeah, Bill, I was thinking, I actually, over the last couple of years, was working with a couple really good data scientists, and we were building some models in the cybersecurity space, right, where we're trying to detect attacks on networks. And it was really hard to get real training data there of what an actual attack looks like. And we were, the team was able to generate fake attacks in a lab environment, and then overlay that on top of the actual steady state log data, right? So we could get a feel for, hey, what would an attack actually look like, right? And then we could play with the parameters around the attacks, and generate a whole number of different variations there to help train our models. So yeah, it was a great example of using synthetic data to help in an area where it was just really hard to get the actual training data you needed.
That's an interesting idea, Brian. I remember talking with some of the people at GE a few years ago. They were trying to do predictive maintenance models on their gas turbines. And they said that, the problem is they don't break down often enough to give you good training data. I wonder if they could have created synthetic data to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and along that line, Tom, you could argue in some respects this whole concept of digital twins that's taken off in areas like heavy equipment manufacturing is in effect a form of synthetic data, right? You're creating a synthetic representation of that turbine and then implementing various conditions that are theoretically then being modeled in a realistic fashion. And so it's the same general concept of simulating something in a realistic enough fashion that it can help you better understand the true phenomenon, even though you're only dealing in a simulation.
So maybe flight simulators, we could capture the data from those and get better autonomous piloting of jets and so on.
Well, and if we really want to get crazy, we can go into the those out there that believe our entire world in existence is in fact a simulation. So I don't know what we would do with that here. A simulation within a simulation, I guess we're talking about for those folks.
My head is reeling from that very idea.
Exactly. And with that, it's a good time to move on to our fifth prediction.
Rein that in, Brian.
That's right.
Yeah, so this is one I don't think is a surprise because it follows a pattern, but ethical legislation, particularly around AI, is really starting to hit a stride. So we went through a few years where it was all about, like, say, the privacy and the data protection, GDPR, California's laws, et cetera. Well, what's happening now, we don't actually have a lot of laws yet about ethical AI, but what we have are proposed laws and frameworks for laws all over the globe. There's a big framework over in Europe. I think it's called the AI Act. The government here, the administration, released an AI Bill of Rights. I think it was in the last month or two. It hasn't been more than 2 months. There's a number of individual states coming up with their own, either targeting certain areas like AI in hiring or general AI. And so the thing today is that most all of these policies are literally drafts, suggestions, non-binding, right? They're not yet laws. However, I think we can all take as a fact that now that we have drafts of said laws all over the world, it's a pretty short hop from a draft to these things starting to get passed. So this year, I wouldn't be at all surprised if some of the first major ethical legislation around AI, in fact, gets passed and implemented. So with that, a couple of priorities. Obviously, if you have a stake in this, if you're doing a lot of AI, there's still time to shape and influence these regulations. So, I know a lot of large companies out there, you've already got, lobbyists and people that work with lawmakers to help shape these kind of things. Get involved and try and shape it while you can. I think it's also a really good idea, just like you could see privacy regulations coming down the pike before it was officially law. There's a lot of consistencies in some of these frameworks and some of these policies. Take some time, study them, and begin to implement the pieces that seem most obviously coming our direction so that you're ahead of the game and you have less to do retroactively. Not to mention the fact that it's never a bad thing to try and build more ethics in anyway. So even to the extent that a few of the things you do don't end up being full-scale enforceable by law, I don't think you're serving yourselves or your reputations any disservice by being able to say that you're implementing ethical checks and balances even beyond what the law needs. Now, of course, I think we're going to start to have some real problem spots. Whatever laws get initially passed always have some loopholes or some unintended consequences that'll have to be addressed. But the first big waves are going to probably hit this year.
Bill, I know, reading through some of these, I'm just really curious how some of these things are going to play out in real life. So I know, like in the AI Bill of Rights, right, it had a statement there that says, a consumer or individual must have access to a person who can quickly consider and remedy problems you encounter, right? Which that just feels like, I don't know. I think that's going to be very hard for most organizations to address. I'm just picturing, how do we enable our associates in a call center to answer questions about an automated decision and the factors, and then override it if need be. I don't know. It's really interesting to see how it plays out.
If quickly is defined at government speed, we could be okay.
Yeah, no, I think this is important for us, and I don't know. I thanked Europe for moving much faster about this than the US. We do have that Bill of Rights, but it's not doesn't have and isn't intended to have the force of law. It's just a set of guidelines. So, but I was on with a webinar earlier this week with Sandy Pentland at MIT, and he said, well, don't thank them because he's not that impressed. And he was involved, I guess, with some of the drafting of the AI Act in Europe. But some of the people I've talked about at companies have said really helps them start to do AI auditing and assurance and so on. They have a set of criteria to measure it against. Otherwise, it's all pretty abstract. So I think it's a great thing, and I hope the world moves rapidly to follow Europe's lead.
But Sidra, I think a lot of these predictions today actually intersect a bit, right? Synthetic data, generative AI, ethics, they all come to play, because I was thinking about this and having a conversation this morning. If I go to a generative AI algorithm and ask it for an essay on something, right? If I turn that in directly, that's obviously not my work. That's clearly, a plagiarism / falsifying. But what if I take whatever the generative AI spit out and then I heavily edit it? Like I use it as a starting point and I go through it literally word by word, sentence by sentence. I tune it, I make it my own. At what point is it my own enough that it counts as mine and it's not AI generated and fake? And I think these are issues that are obviously going to have to play out through some, in many cases, lawsuits of people who feel they've been wronged on one side or the other, and just test cases, because I don't think there's easy answers to a lot of this stuff. And we're going to see examples that we're not even thinking of today that come up that will go, wow, hadn't thought about that, but that definitely needs to be addressed. And so the sooner we can get some frameworks for, at least at a high level, how to go about thinking about and addressing these things, I think we'll be better served.
By the way, companies like OpenAI say, if you create a document with GPT-3 or ChatGPT, there is no document just like that anywhere in the world. It is original, they say. Obviously, it's created from snippets of text from all over the place, mostly the internet, of course. But I don't know. They say that it's yours to use because it doesn't generate copyright issues or plagiarism issues. I'm not sure a lot of people will agree. So.
All right. Well, that wraps up our 5 predictions and priorities from the IAA team. So we'll switch gears here slightly and share our guest predictions. So we reached out to our friends at Birchworks. It's a leading in the analytics talent space, leading company in the analytics talent space. And we know this, we keep hearing this from clients over and over again. This has been a tough year in the talent space with attrition and salaries increasing. And so we wanted to get Birchworks' perspective on, their prediction for what might be coming in the next year here in the talent space. And they have told us that mission-driven companies are going to have a competitive edge when recruiting, right? So if you kind of think over the last couple of years, obviously we know salaries are important and have gone up. More recently, right? We know, I think, work from home and hybrid arrangements are just table stakes now, right? It's not a nice to have, it is a must have when you're competing for talent. But I think the next thing we all need to be aware of is making sure we're not just talking about the tasks of a role, but making sure we're also talking about the mission of the company, right? And how your, how you as an employee of that company is going to be able to further the mission, and making sure that mission aligns with the candidate's beliefs, right? And we've seen that talking to a few people here recently where they've had difficulty even getting applicants because they didn't talk about that mission, or or perhaps because their brand is not well understood in the market. And there's great, very mission oriented things going on at these companies, but they're not talking about it. So I think it's a great thing as you think about going to career fairs and writing job descriptions. Make sure you embed that mission focus in there. So big thanks to Palmer Karsh for helping us there and providing that information. Guys, any thoughts on this?
I think I would agree generally that that's true. I do a fair amount of work with healthcare organizations, and they're very grateful for the fact that they may not be able to afford to pay analytics experts and data scientists as much as some other organizations, but there are a fair number of people who want to work more on human health and on helping some companies sell more consumer products or sell more tech or whatever. So they've already profited from that, it seems to me.
And I think maybe Ryan can find, I think we had a blog on this a couple months back as well on this general topic, and that I believe includes a couple of examples of how to change the semantics of a job offer or a job description. Because I think this doesn't mean you literally need your entire company to refocus everything it's doing to recruit, but it's literally how are you positioning the job and what that candidate would be doing on that job as you recruit them. And a lot of times, you're not having to stretch very far to make it, sound a little more mission driven, right? It's about, focusing on the benefits to the stakeholders of the work that you're doing, rather than the pure analytical benefits or the pure financial benefits. So, I think a lot of people these days, I think COVID made folks, re-examine what was important to them, and a lot of people do. They don't want to just be helping sell more widgets. They want to be doing something that has a bigger purpose.
All right. Well, that wraps up our content here. So here's just kind of a quick summary of what we went over today. And as Bill predicted last year, there's probably a good chance this will kick us off next year when we do the 2024 predictions. But with that, I think we're doing pretty good on time, and we've saved a couple minutes here for any questions you got there, Jason.
We got a few minutes here. Yeah, that was excellent, guys. Thank you so much. Before we move to Q&A, just wanted to share with everybody that if you want a more detailed reading of the predictions and priorities that you heard in this session, please follow the link that we'll drop in the chat for our complimentary research brief. And this paper does include the Birchworks guest prediction and some very interesting statistics around DNA candidate priorities. So actually, if we start with the guest prediction, there was a question that came in just around the talent constraints. And do you think that the constraint will ease up as more tech companies lay off more tech resources?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's related to that issue of mission driven. I think Bill mentioned widgets and I mentioned selling more consumer products, but I think there are more and more people who are not that interested in getting more people hooked on social media, for example. So I think in addition to the financial problems those organizations are having, some are starting to see some problems in keeping people who are worried about the impact of some of those technologies on society. I don't think it's a flood. I think it's been a trickle thus far, but it could easily turn into a flood.
And I'd say if someone's desperate for a job, they might on the short term in the moment loosen their mission requirements, but I don't think that they're necessarily going to go away. And either they're going to find a way to make the job they took with you a mission, or they'll just have one eye looking out from the time they come on until they find something better. So I think it's I don't think this is a trend I'd want to ignore. And I'll just give one example of how to refocus, right? If I was working on predictive maintenance for let's say some type of farming equipment or some type of turbine, like Tom mentioned, there's not much mission involved in that. I want to keep the turbine with a higher uptime and more, and lower costs of maintenance. That's true. But that turbine might be a major power source for a city that you're going to keep the lights on for 1 million people and make sure that, the hospitals are safe because they have full power, et cetera, right? There's the outcome of keeping that turbine running, which the analytical view is one, but the impacts to the community is the other. And just by focusing yourself and your candidates on those other outcomes, I think that's a way to appeal to people that, wow, I'm not just working on these big turbines, I'm actually helping keep the lights on. That's a lot more, that's a lot more motivating.
Or help people fly around the world on jet planes.
Yeah.
Same
Wait.
technology, basically.
Yeah. I'm gonna take JP's question here. He said, what happened to blockchain? It doesn't come up like it used to, but could solve some of the problems surfaced here. For example, checking research references for established lineage and number of other citations. And quite frankly, blockchain didn't really come up too much in our kind of planning sessions, around our predictions and priorities. So what do y'all think?
I don't know. Have any of you heard of this company called FTX? I think that's one of the things that happened to blockchain. I don't know, I've seen a number of surveys over the last several years of what are the most transformational technologies out there. And AI, which I think analytics is the first cousin of, has always been rated higher than blockchain in its ability to potentially transform organizations. Now, I think with let's face it, too much of blockchain was tied in with crypto, and given the problems that cryptocurrencies are having right now, I think this is not a good time for putting them on a list of most important technologies for the near future. I'm not denying that blockchain can have certain advantages in terms of its database oriented functions, but it's just not good timing to talk about it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So to go back to the talent conversation here, got a good question just around the talent, the hiring implications and talent acquisition implications for the generative AI movement. Do we really need data scientists in the traditional sense if this takes off and takes a grip on companies?
I was really wondering, Jason, if we really need directors of content anymore.
We'll take that next session. Yeah.
Now, I do think that there is going to be a need for data scientists for a couple of reasons. One, those models, those generative models are created in the first place by data scientists. But then what we're seeing is that individual organizations can do fine-tuning of those models with their own content. Or I could take all of the books that I've ever written and fine-tune train Chat GPT or GPT-3 or something like that on that content and say, produce a new book for me. That would require more data science talent than I actually have. So I think we're going to need still professional data scientists to do not just the development of the initial large language or image models, but also the fine tuning in many cases. But I do think it's going to transform content generation and creative sorts of activities. A different form of generative AI has already, I think, started to transform architecture. The certain design professions are going to be changed by it, but I don't think it's going to diminish the demand for data scientists.
Yeah, Jason, go ahead, Bill.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, one thing I've noticed the last couple of years is I think in a lot of analytics teams, there is a greater need for people with traditional software development skills, right? Because these are, often services, right? And I get there's a whole host of services offered by the cloud providers, right? So I think, there is, I think that changes your talent mix a little bit. Maybe I need slightly less kind of pure data scientists, but slightly more people with these software development skills that can call APIs and develop microservices and things like that.
Great.
And I'll just say, I think what data scientists do and what the analytics professionals for the decades before that term became big do has changed from year to year, and certainly massively changes as you look across, say, 10-year chunks as things have evolved. And I think it'll be the same thing. Do I think the data scientists will be building the exact type of models in the exact same way 5 years from now of what they were doing this past year? No. Do I think, though, that there's going to be any lack of new types of models, new types of data, new types of things for them to do? I really doubt it. So, even to the extent you can kind of mostly automate and standardize one type of model, I don't think we're anywhere near having finished modeling everything that's going to be of importance, in the business world or the world at large.
All right, great. We got a lot of really good questions. Don't have time to get to them all, but let's try to get to one or two more. A few questions around the synthetic data and kind of related to this idea of like, how does synthetic data deal with outliers that may not be captured in the seed data? Bill, do you want to take a stab at that?
Well, I guess what it comes down to is, I think the assumption, if you're using a baseline data set to then create a synthetic one, you obviously have to have that baseline data have representation of all aspects of it. And if outliers are a key component of that real data, then you need to inject some outliers into the synthetic data. I mean, an alternative view would be like in the case in that retail data set we were working with, we specifically didn't want to inject a bunch of outliers and all, because we wanted to make sure that we could get models that would identify the trends that were underneath the data accurately when it was clean. Once we had that, then phase 2 would be to start to inject the noise into the data, and including things like outliers to see if the models were able to adapt and account for that. So I think it's definitely something that has to be, you'd have to develop your plan of both what the initial data would be synthesized to look like, and then how you would evolve that synthesis as you progressed your efforts.
Okay. All right. And just one more here, kind of hitting on the ethics in AI legislation. So do you see the higher focus on ethical AI and ethical analytics to be a matter of higher awareness of the impact and importance of analytics on people and society? And do you see a connection between analytics maturity and human-centric ethical approaches in organizations?
Yeah, I've always had a bit of a challenge figuring out exactly what we mean by human-centric approaches. I mean, we end up training most AI models on the basis of human decisions made in the past. And it's interesting that we complain about AI being biased in general. I think it's probably a lot less biased than human decisions are, which have been biased. If you don't believe me, look at the Wikipedia entry for decision biases. I think there are about 175 different versions of human decision biases listed there. So, I think we certainly need to consider the implications of AI and analytical models on humans. Is that human-centric AI? I guess it is. And I think the ethical implications are an important issue. One of the companies, Unilever, that I've just been working with and writing about, says that any decision affecting a human ultimately needs to be made by a human. So that sort of takes away some of the productivity from AI, but it means you can't fire somebody or dock their pay or anything like that on the basis of an AI recommendation only. But it'll be interesting to see how those things work out. I think that New York State law also suggests that humans have to review employment decisions. It hasn't gone into effect yet, but I think it does next year.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you again for your insights, and thank you everybody for joining and your great questions. We're at the top of the hour. So stay tuned on our email and social media channels for other upcoming blogs, webinars, ebooks, and other content. We'll be sharing a recording of this webinar in an email tomorrow, and it will also be available on our website. So have a great holiday break, everybody, and see you in 2023. Be well.